Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second session of our Evolution and Heredity, Grade 10. So, before starting up the session, I would like you to take through this entire Swiflearn process and how we work here. So, in Swiflearn, it's India's most sincere learning destination. It's for grade 3 to 10. We have 100% live and interactive classes, personalized attention, batch with a maximum of 6 students, a dedicated academic mentor, team to track and work on students' progress, and we cover all the syllabus per your school exams, and we can handle your custom request as well. Okay, so there are very interesting features that we provide in Swiflearn, right? We give you a detailed progress report, how you have worked with us, how you have given your assignments and everything. Then Swiflearn Academic Test Series is there to help you out. Then take ultimate practice test and subjective test for school exams, right? So you can book your trial class right now. Moving further, if you have not yet subscribed, please subscribe the channel, press the bell icon, and never miss any update. So, Heredity and Evolution Part 2. In today's session, we will learn about these very four important topics, that is inheritance in human, Mendel's experiment, monohybrid and dihybrid cross, Mendel's law, right? So, do you know that different traits like weight, height, color, and skin pigmentation are determined by the presence of homozygous or heterozygous genes in our body? Do you remember we discussed about homozygous and heterozygous genes in our previous session as well? You remember? You know, the dominant here refers to the relationship between two varies of genes, right? Individual receive two varies versions of each gene known as alleles, right, from the each parent. If the alleles or the genes are different, only allele will be expressed that is dominant, and each of the allele are called, the ones that are not shown are known as recessive. Okay, so there is one dominant and there is one recessive. If I talk about here heterozygous, it refers to having inherited difference from a particular gene from each parent. A heterozygous, or like genotype, stand in contrast of a homozygous genotype, where an individual inherits identical forms of a particular gene from each parent. So hence you get some identical traits from your parents. Sometimes you get the kind of weight, sometimes you get the kind of height or hair color that are quite evident and visible, right? So that means they're more dominant. Okay, and the ones that are not dominant are called as recessive. Moving further, let us see inheritance in human, what all things are included over here, right? So suppose there is a characteristic like an eye color, right? So the dominant trait is going to be brown and the recessive one is going to be blue because brown is more common. Now maybe rolling the tongue is more dominant than not rolling the tongue. So you get that. Hands, most probably we tend to be right-handed than the left-handed because that is the right hand one is the more dominant trait. Then your thick lips are more dominant than the thin lips. So the thin lips were recessive trait. Same goes with the blood quality. That means RH blood group, that is positive, that you get more, like that is more dominant in nature. On the other hand, recessive is the negative blood group. Moving further, here there are some more characteristics like color vision, green or red. It's usually normal, that is more dominant. Color, like color blind, is very rare, that is recessive. Now cheeks dimple, that are normal, and the other one are recessive, depending upon which are the traits that are more dominant, while the things were getting evoluted. Okay, so shape of the face, that is oval or round, which one is more dominant? That is oval, so you tend to get an oval shape of the eye. If it's almond shape, that is more dominant, then you get that in place of round eyes. Moving further, earlobe, that can be free, like they are not touched or attached with your cheeks or your bone, your chin bone over here, so they are more dominant, so you get that absolutely. And the attached one are rare, that are recessive. Now let us talk about Mendelian genetics. Who was Mendel and what exactly he did to make the study more amazing and give us these beautiful and amazing facts about how the things are transmitting, how this heredity is taking place. So Mendel helped us understand about these things, that how the traits, how the genes are being transferred from one generation to the other. Right? So Mendel's law of inheritance are statements about the way certain characteristics are transmitted from one generation to another in an organism. Right? So, George John Mendel conducted experiment with garden pea plants and determined the rules for the inheritance of traits. So, what he did was he selected some different kind, like the normal pea plant. He selected some of the species and tried to do some experiment and learned that how the characteristics, how the traits of one pea plant or the other pea plant come and combine and give, like the other ones inherit those things from the parent plants. Okay, so right now we will learn more in detail that why exactly he's choose the pea plant, or why exactly what all transmissions happen. So it's going to be a detailed process that we're going to learn together. Let's see. So, among the traits that the Mendel studied while he was doing the experiment with the pea plants, he observed the color of the plants. Okay, color of the plants and flower, then location on the plant where exactly they grew, then the shape and the color of pea pods, the shape and the color of the seeds, and the length of the plant stem. Okay, so if you can see right here, the chart is also shows the same thing, where it shows the color, flower colors, like the dominant trait, the recessive trait, then the seed color and the seed shape. So the more dominant one was green and round, and the recessive one were yellow and wrinkled. Moving to the pod and color and the shape, so usually there are green, that was dominant, and they are inflated, that was dominant. And what was recessive, that was not they're getting from their parent, was they are yellow in color, or they have, like they are like squished together, like constricted. Okay, and what else they got in, that is the flower position and stem length. So they are axial, and the like terminal was very very rare, very recessive, like at the top of it if they are. Okay, now they were tall, and dwarf was very rare. Moving further, his experiment consists of crossing pea plants of distinct characteristics. So, what were the distinct characteristics he was looking at? He was looking at the size, he was looking at the color of the seeds, and find out the result and interpreting them. Mendel is considered the father of genetics. He was monk. He was a biologist and a botanist as well. He was born in Austria in 1822 and died in 1884. So I would say, he chose seven pair of contrasting characteristics in a pea plant. And what was those seven characteristics? So those seven characteristics, if I just go by the list, are the pea shape, if they were round or they were wrinkled. He also observed the pea color, like it was green or was it yellow? It also observed the pod shape, that is constricted or inflated. He observed the pod color, that it was yellow or it was green. It also observed the size of the flower color, that was purple or white, and the plant size, that was tall or dwarf, and position of flower, that was axial or terminal, right? These the same things you can right now, if you can just see onto the left hand side of the screen, the entire characteristics traits. The first one, the flower color, they can be purple in color or white in color. The purple one is more dominant. The dominant one are right here, that is purple in color, green and round. That is the pod color is also green and they're usually inflated. They are axial and tall, right? So these are the very, very important 7 conditions which Mendel looked while he was doing the experiment to know how they are going to give the traits from one generation to the other, right? Now, let's move a little further and read about what exactly and why exactly he chose a pea plant. So he chose a pea plant because it has a very short life cycle. You know, the pea plant, if you like, it's kind of very small. It does not take long, like in years to grow. Like if you look at mangoes or you look at any fruits, they usually comes once a year. You have to wait for 12 months to get the fruit, right? But here for the pea plant, it was 3 to 6 months where he used to grow like the plants, and 3 to 6 months he used to grow 1 or 2 cycles of a pea plant, right? There are large number of seeds produced, isn't it? It's quite common in the peas. There are so on a single plant we can see so many, I would say, pea pods. Right now it is self-pollinating. Now it is like biennial plant. What do you mean by a biennial plant? Any plant that completes its life cycle in 2 growing seasons. During the first growing season, biennial produce root, stems, and leaves. During the secondary, they produce flowers, fruits, and seeds, and then they die. So this is a short span, a short life cycle that they have. So short life cycle also meaning the biennial plant. So the pea plant is a biennial plant. I hope you understood the meaning of a biennial plant, right? So that was about it. And then the several contrasting characteristics, right? So pea plant, if you see, like so many peas, like the beans or the something that comes over there, the fruit comes, it's so huge in number that you can have a proper contrasting, or you can like do a proper, I would say, the differentiation between the seeds and the things that are growing onto the plant, right? Now, what did he find among all doing this entire experiment? So Mendel cross-pollination the different types of pea plant. Sometimes the plant had the same characteristics and sometimes different. He observed the plants that were created for few generations and determined the rules for the inheritance of traits. Now, what all things he find out? Now he find out that monohybrid cross used to happen over there. What exactly a monohybrid cross? Mendel took the pure breed parent pea plant with different characteristics. All the flowers obtained were purple in color. The offsprings obtained are F1 progeny or first filial generation. Okay, so what happened here is that what did Mendel do over here? He took up the pure breed, that was the purple flower, and then he took up the other plant that was not the parent plant, right? So he picked up these 2 flowers, did they then did the mixing of both the plants and came up with the result where all the obtained offsprings were having the traits from the parent pea plant, because the dominant traits were present, more dominant traits were there in the parent pea plant over here. Like if you can see, the dominant one are always represented by capitals, isn't it, right? The capital, and the smaller ones by the lowercase, right? So here, if you can see the pea plant right here, it is right here, P and P, it's capital P and small p. a single, a capital P and a small p again, a capital and a small p again. Or it can have a capital P or a small p, a capital and a small p, but here the product that is generated is white in color. Now, in heterozygous condition, when a male pistil and a female pollen were like put together, the male and the female pistil and pollen were put together, what was the ratio? What was the ratio of getting the dominant trait? So it was the ratio of 3:1. Here, if you can see, the B, the capital B are the dominant one, and the small ones are the recessive traits, right? So if you can see, when the two dominant traits multiply, of course, they're going to produce the dominant one. What if a dominant one and a dominant trait and a recessive trait appears? So of course it's going to be a dominant trait, right? What if here the B, that is small b here, that is the recessive, and one is here the more dominant one? So of course, whenever there is a dominant trait, it is the inheritance of the one that is more prominent is going to take place. So that's why again it's purple in color. But when the both of them were recessive, right? So that's how a white flower generated, because there was no dominant trait left over here. There were only recessive traits. So both the recessive traits multiply and produced a smaller, or the one that was less likely to be appear, right? Further, what were the other findings? So, from pure breed experiment, he concluded that the dominant traits were always seen in the progeny, right? The dominant, right now, we just saw an experiment or matrix where it was quite evident that until and unless there is no dominant trait over there, then only they will pick up the recessive. Otherwise, we always see that the dominant traits were picked up in the progeny, whereas recessive traits were hidden. From the heterozygous experiment, he concluded that the traits were not blended but remained distinct in the subsequent generations. Thus, traits carried by genes do not mix. Now, this one, the dihybrid cross, it's kind of the same matrix but a little bigger. Okay, now if you just read, okay, we will look at the matrix a little later. Let's first read out what exactly the dominant traits and the recessive traits are being, I would say, uh, how they are put over here or how they are nominated over here. So if you see, the round and yellow, if you remember, were the dominant traits, right? So they are represented by capital R, that is for round, and capital Y for yellow, right? Recessive traits were wrinkled, that is by small r, and green by small y. So if the two pair of contrasting characteristics are taken to cross between two plants, then this matrix will show how the generations, or what all things the plant that is going to be generated will inherit. Okay, so if you can see ry, that is the dominant round and dominant yellow. Over here also dominant r and dominant round and dominant yellow. So of course the progeny that's going to come is going to be round and yellow, right? Because all of them are the dominant traits. On the other hand, if you keep this in the constant, change the gametes over here, right? So it's now going to be, if you remember, if it still says that the ry over here are dominant and ry over here, if there's only one small y over here, right? So that means we still have y in the dominance, right? Over here the yellow is still in the dominance. So here round and yellow, that is more dominant, that is going to take place. On the other hand, if you keep this constant ry, that is round and yellow, but the gametes were both r and y, but Again, here, what are the dominant one? These capital R and capital Y, that is round and yellow. So the progeny over here will be round and yellow. Similarly, RY, we keep it constant, and RY here, if we see, R is small, that is wrinkled, Y is yellow, right? It's capital. So what is more dominant? R here, that is for round, is more dominant. So we have a round one. On the other hand, Y is the dominant one for our yellow. So we have a round and yellow progeny over here. Let's move on to the second row. So over here, if I look at the first condition over here, there is a round R. R, that is for round, that is a dominant trait. Y for green, that is a recessive trait. But here, if you see on the top of the column, if you see that is R is for round and Y is for yellow, and R and Y both are capital, that means both are dominant traits. So hence the progeny or the product is going to be round and it's going to be yellow. On the other hand, moving further, if I can see here that R was both of them here in the row as well, here in the column as well, it was capital. So which was more dominant over here? The yellow, the round one, right? But on the other hand, Y, that stands for the color, the yellow, both are small. So there was no option of the dominant trait over here left. So hence we get a green color, because both Y, small y, and here also small y stands for green in color, right? So one was the dominant trait, that was round, but on the other hand, Y was both recessive. Hence, we got a product that has green in color and was recessive, but the trait was recessive in nature. Moving further here, if you see, both R and Y, R is capital here, but R in the row above is small. So the dominant one, R, is round, hence it is entirely round, the product. But on the other hand, Y here is small and Y again here is small, hence the product that we get is round but green in color. That is recessive. The color comes from the recessive, less dominant one. Last one here, if we see R here is capital, but R here is small, but we have one R capital. Hence, we will get a product that is round in color. On the other hand, Y here, if you can see, is small here, but Y here on the top of the row, on the top of the column, is capital. So automatically yellow become more dominant than green. Hence, the product we got is round and yellow in color. Moving to the third row. In the third row, if you can see, the R and Y are both small, that is recessive, but on the top we have different conditions. So let us see what we get in the product. So here, if you see, R and Y both are recessive, but on the top both R and Y are capital. That means they are dominant in nature. Hence, what do we get? Hence, we get a more dominant product that is round and yellow in color. Moving forward, R and Y again in the row are recessive, but on the top, if you see, R is capital. So hence round, we get the dominant trait, but Y, because Y is smaller on both ends, that is recessive in nature. Hence we get green in color. And here, the fun part, here the RY small, here also RY is small. So here we get the least recessive, or the product of both the recessive ones, where it is wrinkled and as well as green in color. Similarly, here we can see this product where R and Y are small. R and Y are, if you can see, one R is small and Y is capital. Y stands for yellow. So hence R are both small. So we get wrinkled, and Y for the capital one, that is yellow condition, right? Similarly, try and read out the last one and right now and create your own and try to see the product if it matches with the rows and column. So in the similar way, you can also create your own dominant trait table, like this, the matrix over here that is being created. Moving further, What is a phenotypic ratio? That is 9 is to 3 is to 3 is to 1. That was from here, the matrix that we saw right now. So what was that is the ratio that he observed while he did all his experiment. So there were out of, if you look at the table right here, it is 4 into 4 matrix, right? And hence we get how many products, how many results? We get 16 results. Out in that 16 result, he has 9 round and yellow, 3 round and green, 3 wrinkled, and 1 wrinkled plus green. Find out the genotype ratio. Okay. Now, findings. What were the findings of his experiment by doing all this? He conducted that the true traits were inherited independently of each other. The dominant allies or each of the two traits asserted their dominance independent of the other. Mendel's law, like law of dominance. In the two alleles at a locus differ, they then one, the dominant allele determines the organism's appearance. We saw that always the dominant one determines the organism's appearance, that how exactly it's going to look like. The other, the recessive allele, has no noticeable effect on the organism's appearance. If you just remember this matrix, always the one, even if the single trait or even if the single chromosome you get of the dominant one, you will have the dominant trait and the other traits will reside, they will hide on, okay? And they will not be even noticeable effects on the organism's appearance. Law of segregation. The two alleles for a heritable character separates during the gamete formation and end up in different gametes. The law of independent assortment. Each pair of alleles segregates independently of other pair of alleles during the gamete formation. Now, let us check our learning a little bit. A little bit of learning, that whatever we have done up till now, let us check it together. So, how does the creation of variation in species promote survival? You remember this important question, that how exactly if we have variation in the species, how is it helping for our survival? Next question that we are going to learn and check our learning is, when Mendel crossed a tall plant with a dwarf plant, no medium height plant were obtained in F1 generation. Why? Then the third question, why are the traits acquired during the lifetime of an individual not inherited, and how does the mechanism of heredity work? Now, these are very, very important questions that we should know as well in the, I would say, in the respect of examination as well. Let's move and answer these questions. So firstly, the first question, how does the creation of variation in a species promote survival? The answer is variation helps the species to survive in all the conditions. If you remember, we learned that the first thing that got like maybe produced on the earth, the millions and millions years ago, was there inside the water. Then there was something that got outside the water due to maybe having different kinds of conditions, right? And variation in the species, it got out of the water and was able to survive because of the inherited or maybe acquired traits. And that is how this thing, all these things generated and kept on like moving from one generation to the other because of this variation in the species, right? If there was no variation in the species, then it would have been really, really difficult for the survival. Yeah. No medium height plant. So, sorry, just going back to the question first. When Mendel considered a tall plant with a dwarf plant, no medium height plant were obtained in the F1 generation. Why? Because because what happened, the dominant genes express themselves and suppress the effect of recessive genes, right? And the dominant traits were what? The taller ones, right? Therefore, there were no mixing alleles in the F1 generation. The F1 generation just picked up the traits from the more dominant one, and the more dominant one was what? The tall. So hence the trees were tall, and there were no medium size height plants that were grown over that time. Now, the third question that was, it stated, why are the traits acquired during the lifetime of an individual do not inherit it? Right? So the traits acquired during the lifetime of an individual are not inherited because the change in non-reproductive tissues or somatic cells cannot be passed on to the DNA of the germ cell. Thus, the acquired trait will be gone with the death of an individual. It is therefore non-inheritable and cannot be passed on to its progeny. I hope this is clear, right? Now, question number 4, how does the mechanism of heredity work? So, of course, we all know that we have DNAs, right? The genes from our generations, we are getting genes from our different generations. So, cellular DNA genes is the information source which regulates metabolism and makes the promotion in the cell. During sexual reproduction, both the parents contribute equally to the DNA of the progeny. Thus, all the cells have two copies of chromosome, one from the male and other from a female. When these two combine, they maintain the total number of chromosomes and ensure the stability of DNA of the species. Now, we have few more practice questions. Let us do it together as well. So if we talk about the first question here that talks about in a human being, blue eye color is recessive to brown eye color. If a brown eye man has a blue-eyed mother, then find what are the possible genotypes of his father. So, in a human, I'll read the question again here. In a human being, there he got blue eye color is recessive to brown eye color, right? Blue eye color is always recessive to brown eye color. If a brown eyed man has a blue eyed mother, then find the possible genotypes of his father, right? So the father has a genotype where where the possibilities of the possible genotype of his father may be the blue eye were more dominant, right, of his father, right? So there will be B, both the B's here will be capital. What is the genotype of a man and his mother? So for the man, the genotype will be capital B and a small b. And for the mother, it's going to be small b, both the small b. Why? Because blue eyes are always, I would say, uh, uh, are recessive. Blue eyes are very rare. On the other hand, the man has blue eyes, so B capital for the capital B from the father, right, and the small b from the mother, right? Distinguish between acquired and inherited traits. Give an example of each. Okay, so let's do this also, that what exactly are acquired and inherited traits. So right now I'm giving a little explanation. Later in the video you will also find out the detailed answer written over here. So right now let us try to discuss it rather than just reading it out, right? So distinguish between acquired and inherited traits. Give an example of each. Okay, so what exactly are the inherited traits? These are acquired due to change in the genes or DNA, right? But the acquired traits, what are acquired traits? Like no change in the genes is involved here. Okay, the inherited traits you just pass on to one generation to the another, but acquired traits you cannot transfer from one generation to the other, right? What are the examples of inherited and acquired trait? Inherited traits are like your skin color, your hair color, maybe your color of your eyes, right? Your appearance. That is your inherited traits. And what are your acquired traits? Like you do cycling, you do swimming, maybe you are good at few activities, right? So that you cannot pass on, right? That is the other person, even your son or daughter, right? Or your brother or sister, they need to learn it. You cannot get it from your parent, right? Or in your DNA over there, right? Question number 3 that ask about how do Mendel's experiments show that traits are inherited independently, right? So how are the traits inherited independently? So uh, it will say that genes located on different chromosomes will be inherited independently on each other. Mendel observed that when peas were more than one trait were crossed, the progeny did not always match the parent, isn't it? They were not always matching the parent. This is because the different traits are inherited independently. This is the principle of independent assortment. Now, question number 5, what is the condition for Mendel's second law to be valid? So, what exactly was the condition for the second law? And what exactly was the second law? Mendel's second law states that the outcome of one gene is not related to the outcome of other genes. It is also known as the law of independent assortment. It was discovered when Mendel compared the two alleles, the possible form of genes, for the color and the shape of peas, right? What constitutes the link between one generation and the other? The gametes, right? The gametes constitute the link between one generation and the other. They pass on the parent, the paternal and maternal characteristics to the offspring, the paternal and maternal, like father and mother genes, to the offspring. Let us see next question. Mendel, so let us go through the answers here as well. It says Mendel's second law is the only valid for genes located in different chromosomes. For genes situated in the same chromosome, that is linked genes, the law is not valid since the segregation of these genes is not independent. The hereditary information is transferred from parent to offspring through the gametes, right? So gametes constitute the link between one generation and the next and pass on the parental and maternal characteristics to the offspring. Right now, what we discussed. The sex of the child is determined. Few more questions here that will help us revise few important topic that we have covered during the session. The sex of the child is determined by what they inherit from their father and not from their mother. You remember what exactly this is and how exactly it works? You remember there were chromosomes, there were 23 pair of chromosomes, how these 22 are similar, but there was last chromosome which was different, and that has to be when they produce, that had the combination of that last chromosome, how it is crossed and which one get fitted, identifies the sex of the child, isn't it? So men determine the sex of a baby depending on whether their sperm is carrying an X or a Y chromosome, right? And X chromosomes combine with the mother's X chromosome to make a baby girl. On the other hand, if a Y chromosome will combine, the mother will make a baby boy. Explain the result of monohybrid cross. What exactly a monohybrid cross is? It is a genetic mix between two individuals who have homogeneous genotypes, or genotypes that have completely dominant or completely recessive alleles, which result in opposite phenotypes for a certain genetic trait. Right? What is phenotype? Phenotype is your physical appearance. Explain the law of segregation by taking an example. We'll read it and let's do it together. So right now I just explained you about the children inheriting similar chromosome, that how we are going to identify the sex of the child, that 220 there are in total 22 chromosomes present, out of which 22 are exactly same, but the last one in the female, that is both XX, and in the male that is X and Y. So if a child inherits 22 plus an X from the male, then the child that is going to be a girl. On the other hand, if the child inherits 22 chromosomes plus a Y from a male, then it's going to be a baby boy. Now, only one of the parental trait is observed in F1 progeny when two contrasting characteristics of a trait is considered. The trait which is seen in F1 hybrid is dominant one. When F1 hybrid is self-pollinated, both the characteristics appear in ratio of 3:1, which shows that F1 hybrid has the trait of both characteristics. The last one, the law of segregation. Paired factors responsible for a character segregate into gametes and are recombined at the time of fertilization. When a yellow seeded and a green seeded plant are crossed, the F1 progeny are yellow seeded, right? Because that is the more dominant one. It indicates that the yellow color is the dominant over green seed color. When F1 plant are self-pollinated, we get yellow and green seeded plants in the ratio of 3:1. Mendel crossed round and green seeded pea plants with the wrinkled and yellow seeded pea plants. Show the dihybrid cross and give the phenotypic ratio of F2 generation. Now, this question is for you guys. You have to do it on your own and see what you have learned out of today's session. Now, what have we learned in today's session? We have learned about the Jeenia Mendel. His experiment with pea plants concluded that factors determine traits. Some alleles are dominant and some alleles are recessive. Alleles are separated during gamete formation, right? And which is called the principle of unit factors. Some alleles that are dominant, which is called the principle of dominance, and alleles that are separated during germination, which is called the law of segregation. So we learned about separation of unit factor, principle of dominance, and law of segregation. Further, we also learned about alleles for different genes do not influence each others inheritance, and law of interdependence, that is how their assortment, right? Which is so hence we wind up this session, today's session over here. And thank you all of you for joining in. If you have yet not subscribed the channel, please subscribe the channel, press the bell icon, and never miss any update for the next upcoming session. Thank you everybody for joining in. See you soon.